All right, you're going. Yeah.
Hi, guys. Welcome to our first online meeting of Minority Programmers Association. Obviously, we're going to have to do this due to the whole coronavirus situation. And it goes out of present. Yeah, this meeting is going to be centered around security, and we have Andy Malone to help us present with that. So we can go to the next slide. Yep, and that's just a graphic. Keep you from catching viruses. There we go. And if you want to go to the next slide.
And I guess I'll come in and do a little bit of plugging about my club. Hi, everybody. My name is Andy Malone. I'm the president of JMU Cyber Defense Club. We are a student-run organization that helps teach other students cybersecurity skills. We meet every 3:30 on Friday in ISAT 140, the Cyber Defense Room. We cover a wide variety of topics like web hacking, cryptography, reverse engineering, social engineering, and we don't need any background in security or cyber defense to join. We just want to give people experience and resources to actually practice this stuff. We also do some competitions like ISTS, MACCDC. We actually just made it into the finals round for our region, which is big news. It's the first time we did it in 5 years, and VMI Cyberfusion. But enough about that. I'm here to talk a little bit of security stuff. So why not link it back to coronavirus, since that is everywhere now. So some new risks that have risen because of CVOID-19. One of the biggest things is new risks with Zoom and Stack and stuff like that. Zoom in the past has had a lot of issues with it. It had one issue where when people would download the Zoom client on their computer, it actually was also downloading a backdoor in there. I think they fixed that pretty quickly. That was in somewhere around last summer. But now that everybody's out using it, people are finding new bugs and vulnerabilities on them simply because more people are doing that. Another big one is phishing scams. I'm sure everybody in this chat or something gets fake emails that are sent to you. Please don't ever click links in emails. It's just generally bad practice. Another thing is bots are taking up space in the cloud. Ever since coronavirus has happened, a lot of companies that are running cloud services, including AWS, Google, Azure, stuff like that, are having issues with space in the cloud because so many employers are now, or so many companies are now willing to buy more cloud resources. And there have been bots that take up cloud services or deny and take stuff down. And they're having their own troubles with that now. Another thing is, like I said, kind of cloud hosting companies are running out of room. Some of the smaller streaming services, like I think Xfinity Now and something like that, are actually down because so many people are trying to use them, many more than they've ever had to deal with before. And oh, excuse me, sorry about that. And Zoom WebEx are having their own issues as well, because again, they now have to pretty much carry the entire business infrastructure nowadays. Moving on from that, some more questions just to think about before we go into this. Think of your own practices when making code. Do you think about security at all? What are the biggest vulnerabilities that you'd be introducing into a system? Where can you improve? And what do you think a hacker would go for? And this is actually a big thing that we think about in cybersecurity a lot, is the hacker mindset. So when you're trying to defend a system or writing a piece of code, you want to think like a hacker and think, oh, how can I break this? Rather than how can I make this secure? And the last thing is, if you were to hack MPA, what would you go for? Your website, your GitHub? Would you send fake phishing emails? I have a few ideas, but maybe I'll talk with Shot about them later. So why care? Why care about security and especially secure coding, which is the biggest thing I'll be talking about today? Biggest one is developers control security. And most developers aren't really trained in security and they don't know the attack vectors. Schools most certainly aren't teaching it. In the JMU program, for example, unless you're taking a cyber defense class or anything like that, you're not really learning about security. You don't learn about it in 361. And a lot of the time, they're usually not hackers. Now, I know you might do some fancy stuff by yourself, or I don't know, send a fake email or do some hacking stuff on your own, but generally you're not trained in this. You don't know how to, or people aren't trained in it, they don't know how to see vulnerabilities in code. The big thing is the security versus accessibility trade-off. Security will slow down development a lot. The most secure environment you could ever have is one that's unplugged from the wall and not touching anything. However, that's not really possible. And it's also implemented as an afterthought. So a good way to think about that is the more security you have, the slower your development team is going to have to be. But again, if your development team wants to be fast and push out patches push out new updates and patches and features every 2 weeks, then is there really enough time to scan it for security, so on and so forth. And copious amounts of data are stolen every single day. Last year, or not last year, at least 60 million Americans have been victims of identity theft. These usually come from companies having data breaches. And the US government is also putting a ton more money into it nowadays, thankfully. But they spent over 15 billion in 2019 on cyber defense, and that number, I believe, is going to double or even triple in 2020. I mean, especially nowadays with the whole coronavirus situation. So another cool thing, jobs in cybersecurity. There are over 33,000 open cybersecurity jobs in Virginia alone and millions nationwide. In the workforce, we really don't have the amount of people we need to secure every network and give us the security we need across the internet. Mainly that's because a lot of hackers and them don't really want blue team, and some people are kind of led more towards development. But let's start talking about secure coding. So one of the biggest things that we want to do when trying to implement security in code is to implement security at every step. Now, a lot of tools exist for these purposes, like I'll talk about later, but I know a lot of you have probably seen stuff like this, something like this cycle before. We have think about your requirements, think about your design, implementation, testing, deployment, and so on. However, we want to be thinking about security at every single one of these steps here. So when you're testing, do penetration testing. When thinking about requirements, think about threat modeling, use case. Just have security in the back of your mind pretty much the whole time. So now I'm going to go through the top 7 secure coding practices. The first one is validating input. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have written code that takes input from a user, whether it be on the command line or a GUI, something like Java Swing. Consider all input from the user malicious, assume they're bad and want to try to mess with you or break your code. For example, if an int is needed, don't accept a string. And another really good practice is to whitelist things, don't blacklist them. What I mean by that is, for example, if you have a int category where you're taking integers from the user and you can only accept the numbers 1 through 5, only accept the numbers 1 through 5 and blacklist everything else. So whitelist what you can actually accept and blacklist everything else. Design for security. Architecture and design software following and enforcing security policy. Pretty much don't make it blatantly bad. Like, for example, don't put a command line on a web interface that people can type into. That's a bad idea. I mean, you can see it in physical things all the time like this and that, not really keeping people out. Keep it simple. The more complex your design is, the more errors or bugs will probably arise. It's also harder to keep track of your code. You've got a lot of legacy code in the background. You might have small vulnerabilities, might have a piece of code you might not even know are running. And there's also a greater chance of misconfigurations with that. So keeping it simple usually means it's better. Default deny. Again, we want to be based on permission rather than exclusion. Only allow users under certain conditions. So don't just say, that's pretty much going back to whitelisting and blacklisting. You want to whitelist users. You don't want to, well, yeah, you want to have a whitelist of users that can actually go in and then blacklist everybody else rather than saying, oh, this user has done something bad, so we're going to kick them off the system, but everybody else in the world can come in and access these resources. Least privilege principle. That's another important one. So the biggest thing there is when you're running processes on your system, or you have code running, if your code has to be running as root or an elevated user, kill your process after you're done. And if it doesn't have to be running as root, for example, if you are running a piece of code that is just printing out some stuff to a terminal or popping up a fun web GUI like a cookbook, shout out Dr. Norton, don't run it with elevated privileges. If people are using it and break into it and somehow pop out of the process where you're supposed to be, now they've got elevated privileges in your system, and it just pretty much takes a step out of the way for malicious people. Also have defense in depth. Don't just assume that one layer defense is going to work. For example, best way to think about this is if you're trying to secure a physical compound. You wouldn't just have one fence around the perimeter and say, oh, that's probably fine. No one's ever going to climb that. No, you'd want a fence, I don't know, guards, windows with the wire stuff inside of them, security cameras, dogs, I don't know. And that kind of transfers over to not even just having secure code, but having firewalls and then also trusting security people to do some stuff on the outside as well. And last but not least is to adopt secure coding standards. Scan your code after it's written. There's tools that can do that. One of them is Black Duck by Synopsys. I had the privilege of working with that last summer. It's pretty cool. What it'll do is it'll go through your code and look for it looks for common errors and vulnerabilities that can be there. I know Kirk Pams, or if you've ever heard Dr. Kirkpatrick, has definitely talked about string copy versus str copy. And as annoying as it is to use strn copy, it is the proper thing to do. Str copy can lead to something called a buffer overflow, and those methods exist for a reason. Use the safer ones, please. And static analysis is also just looking at code and repositories and just seeing, does it have any very blatant issues in it, like a MySQL injection. So now I'm going to hop off this presentation, and I've set up a quick little demo for you guys that kind of goes through, what is it? It goes through a MySQL injection. I put it on Kali Linux. So let me hop over to that right now. Give me a second. Okay, you all should be seeing this screen now. Can someone in the chat really quickly tell me if you guys can see the
we can see
VM here?
Your screen.
Awesome, sounds good. So what this is here is a damn vulnerable web application. It's a really cool tool for testing web exploitation stuff. What I have is I have my Kali Linux VM, as well as a Metasploitable 2 VM running in the background. Metasploitable 2 is something by Rapid7. It's a VM you can download for free and set up. Please do not point it outwards towards anywhere on the internet. You will be hacked because it's something that's supposed to be hacked. But it also comes with this really cool web app that lets you test things. So what I'm going to go through is an SQL injection after I relog in. First, if you ever do decide to set up a damn web app, usually change the security to low. But let's look at the code here a little bit. How many of you have written some form of PHP before here? And if you work with MySQL, MySQL is a database language that pretty much queries data out of tables. So this is the code on the back end that it is running. And what it's doing is it's taking your ID in and it's saying, here's the ID, give me information about them. So for example, what is the ID of 1? So that's admin. But what's, for example, what I could do is I could give them an input that makes me, that's always true, instead of it just having one valid input. You do this, which is pretty much a stand-in for any character, and then I'd say or 1 equals 1, just something that'll be always true. Hit enter, and that's cool. Didn't work. Spaces were off. Give me a second. MySQL also is very picky with your spaces and tabs and stuff. So yeah, that should do it. It's fun. I love when I do this and it works on my own time, and then it doesn't work after. Yeah. Give me that. Why are you mad at me? Go. No. Is it on low? I sit here.
I've turned it down.
Thank you, Siri. Very cool. Okay. Give me 1 second, please. I swear I've done this a million times and it works. And I love that it's not working right now. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to pass MySQL a command that's always true, so that it pretty much always, maybe it's on the equal sign. Oh no, I can't do that.
Why does the SQL command, like why does this form even have the ability to take in the SQL command?
Because they're not validating their input. What they're doing is they're pretty much just saying, they're assuming that the user is going to pass them a number, which they're not doing, or which I'm trying not to do unsuccessfully right now. But if I can properly, what the heck? I know I got it to work here earlier today. The other ones will work fine, I swear. Give me a minute. Oh, you. I did that one, I did that one, I did that one. That one? No. Probably it. All right, we're going to move on from that first one and just go to another cool one. Try to give it to give me data because it's being finicky with me right now. Here's a cool one. What this does is it pretty much just says, again, show me all the users when it's always true, but then also show me the version of the operating system that's running in the back. Okay, that does not make sense to me. It should be working. My other server down. Give me a second. Oh. All right, well, I'm going to quickly stop sharing this screen and test if my other VM is working. No. Maybe it went down. No, it's still working. That's fun. Well, all right, I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna try it one more time and see if it'll work. I swear, I did this meeting. I did this demo in my own club, and it worked fine for everybody. And now it's not working, which is just awesome.
How do you know if a system is available to do SQL injection? How do you know if it's vulnerable?
Well, first things first, you want to verify that they actually are using MySQL in the background. I mean, most times in most web apps nowadays, we use some form of database. So a lot of the times when you just see an input field, it's just testing it to see, does it have anything? Does it have any, here's the Metasploit level 2 standard thing, so it is still running. Does it have any, all right, let's try this one more time. You just want to verify. Geez, there we go. Okay, cool. Glad to see I'm not going crazy and the commands actually work. So what this did pretty much is it said, okay, standard character, or whenever it's true, show me pretty much all the users in the system, or show me all the options. And again, this is the source code here that's running it. So what I did is I passed it here, get the ID, and then it ran it there pretty much. Now, what this does here is I use the extra little, you see the extra little commas here? Or that's not a comma, it's apostrophe. To add in extra spaces to let me pretty much say, give me pretty much all user IDs. It's always going to be true. And now I can move on to the other stuff, like let me try to get more information about the server that's running there. So again, this here is going to try to let me see the version of the server that's running in the background. So there's another thing at the bottom here. We have the information now that it's running on Ubuntu, and this specific version of Ubuntu. And as a penetration tester or a hacker, that's very important information. I can also see what user is running this web page. And in general, you don't want a privileged user to be running it. But thankfully, this one's running it as root, which is the most privileged user. So that's, again, very bad. Don't want to be doing that. But moving on from that, what I'm going to try to do now is I'm going to try to see if I can find the password hashes of these users in the system here. And if I can get password hashes out and export them onto my personal system, then I can break them in my own time. It's a lot easier than trying to crack them over the web. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to query it so it can show me all the tables on this system. So it's going to be a relatively big command here, but stay with me. Cool. So what this is going to do here is it's going to show me all the tables that it shows users tables that might contain password information for me. The way, again, MySQL works is it's a series of tables that stores information. You can make your own data tables and store customer information or user information. What I'm after here is I'm after the users table, which was where we found those users earlier and where there's probably extra data in there. So I want to zero in on that table and see what kind of columns are inside of it. So what data are they storing in that table? The way I do that is another long command. But again, it's still going back to this same piece of code here that somebody wrote, where I'm putting in, it's expecting some ID here, which is like a number. But instead of that, I'm giving it this, an end quote, and then an or, which pretty much lets me run anything else I want out of it on the MySQL database server, which in general you don't want to do. I'm sorry I can't make this that much more exciting over Zoom. Probably should have typed it out earlier, but let's see. I'm actually typing in. It's not rewritten, I guess. Oh, that's how you spell it. Cool. Love spelling columns wrong. Big fan of that. All right, so what this is going to do is I'm going to try to see every column inside the, great. Give me a second. I typed in something wrong. That's awesome. Actually, might do that. Nope, sick. Love misspelling things. Great. Yeah, my SQL is pretty finicky, but again, the fact that I can still run a lot of these commands is not a good thing. It's not something that someone should be able to do on any of your servers. And nowadays, nope, that would be it. Column's name. Okay. Column name. Yep, that's it. All right, there we go. That took a while. So I can now see in the users table that it has these 6 different columns. It's got your user ID, first name, last name, user, and password, which is stored as a hash. So the hacker thing I'd be after is a password there. So let me see if I can get this database server to spit it out to me. And the way I do that is, again, using that same little character there to pretty much just say, give me everything. Or let me type something afterwards. And it's like, no, that's not it. Oh. First name. The O, the hex thing there is, that is a new line character, by the way. What I'm telling it to do right now is print out these things in order. So I'm showing it to give me the first name. I'm going to tell it to give me the last name. Last name. Let's do user as well. And then password. I'm telling you where it's getting it from. So from users. And boom. Now that is a gaping security vulnerability. That's not something you want to see when somebody can go on your database server or go on your web server, enter something into a field, and then get out a password hash. So, for example, one thing I could do with a password hash, if you're curious about password hash cracking, is that's an MD5 password. I just know that off of force of habit, and because Linux, that kind of Linux server will store it like that. So I can do MD5 hash decryption. if I'm correct. Come on now. So paste that hash in there. Come on now. Oh, I'm on Linux, right? That's not SHA-1. MD5. All right, this is taking so long. Oh no. Code and boom. Password is password. Now, usually it won't be that easy. This is just an example, but it does show how I can get somebody's password through something like a MySQL injection, which to me, pretty cool, I guess. And stuff to think about when you're coding and when you're writing PHP. One thing you can do better here is you can be validating the inputs. Again, you might not want to accept a string, like I talked about earlier. If I'm just looking for a user ID, which is what this is trying to do, don't let me type in this whole abomination that I did earlier here. Don't let me go get the version ID or anything like that. If you're just accepting 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, pretty much, which are the only valid inputs, then you won't have to worry about anything like this. Well, thank you so much for coming and letting me talk. Stop sharing this screen now and switch back over to the presentation. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. If you guys have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them regarding anything I have talked about today. Yeah.
Yeah, real quick. So in the background, what were you running besides the Kali Linux? You said it was started with an M. I couldn't remember the name of it.
That's Metasploitable 2.
Okay.
Type it out somewhere if you want, but it's Metasploitable 2. It's just a Linux ISO. What it does is it's meant to be paired with Kali Linux, and it's used for penetration testing and for people to test out new hacking tools on it. Again, it is an extremely vulnerable virtual machine. If you end up putting it on your computer, make sure you do it in something like VirtualBox or vSphere, because pointing it out to the open world is a very bad idea.
Right, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I have the Kali Linux thing downloaded on there, and I even have like a passphrase and everything, but I didn't know what else I had to kind of run with it.
So if you want, I can quickly show my setup for that, so the people at home can kind of go through that if you want me to.
Oh yeah, that'd be dope.
Okay. Make sure I don't have anything bad on my other monitor here. I have a lot of things open. Okay. Sure, I'll move it over. Give me a second. Just gotta get the screen ready to share. Cool. All right. Okay, can everybody see the screen here?
Yeah.
So what I have running my Macs on my Mac, I just run OS X, but I have VirtualBox. I've got a few different ones here for testing. The ones I'm running right now are my Kali machine. I give this thing a lot of power. Well, relatively a lot of power. It's a virtual machine. What I do is to put them on the same thing. My Metasploitable machine, which is over here. It is a... One second. Another release. Sick. That's not there. Some form of Linux machine that Rapids have been made. You can download them. I think if you do have to send them your what is it? You might have to send your student email to actually get a copy of it, but it takes like 2 seconds. I did it. What you do to set them up together is you go to settings, you go to network, and you turn on NAT network. Now usually it's just on NAT. But by doing NAT network, it allows, if you're having multiple virtual machines running at the same time, for you to be able to see each other. For example, this IP here is a 10.0.2.16, and that's the IP I'm accessing from my Kali Linux VM right there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions about anything I talked about today?
Yeah, kind of more along the lines of how would you hack us? Like how would you go about picking the vulnerabilities in our organization? And like in my we like primarily use GitHub, RootMe, Google Drive, things like that. Like what do you look for in terms of compromising our own security?
Well, the biggest thing is like a penetration test. So the first thing you do, there's a few steps, is you do reconnaissance on the organization. So I'm assuming you guys have a GitHub. You probably have some sort of email. You definitely have a JMU. What's it called? The Be Involved, where you guys all have your different emails on there, information about yourselves, and just pretty much general information gathering. Now, if you are hosting stuff on GitHub, there's not really much I can do in terms of, or much anybody can do in terms of going in and just deleting your files or hacking GitHub. A lot of it is just social engineering, which is seeing all the information I can find about you and your club online, and then using Kali Linux and a SMTP server that I have set up to send a fake email from a fake address to one of the exec members, which their email would probably be on Be Involved, then hopefully get you to click a link that, I don't know, allows me into the GitHub or lets me join, or I don't know, Rick rolls you or something like that. That's probably how I would go about it.
What are some common mistakes? A lot of times, being new kind of like software developers, we're just getting accustomed to GitHub. So what are some things that you kind of see on GitHub in particular that are just outright mistakes by novice developers?
I know a big one. Don't make private repositories public. Make sure you have a good understanding of where all your code is, especially if you're working for a company. A lot of companies will pay for your private repositories, but having something pointing out to the public that shouldn't be seen by the public, there's daily stories of how people get hacked by that. So just be careful and be cognizant of what's there. Another just general security tip that I'd give to everybody is I can't recommend enough having a password manager or something along the lines of that. I don't know how many people here have a password manager, but what it does is it allows you to have one password that pretty much unlocks all your other passwords. It's really helpful because it means you can have a different password for every single website. So your password for your Chipotle app or Starbucks app isn't the same as your bank account or GitHub, which is important because Chipotle is probably spending less money on security than GitHub or your bank account is.
I guess another one for the GitHub one too is that I've seen actual developers in their public repositories put in their private API keys code and leave it in there. It's a good idea to just never leave those in because some people, they can use your key and they can run up your costs. So just make sure that there's no passwords or stuff in your public repositories. That's what I have to comment on that too.
Yeah. Another little fun story regarding that, actually, that everybody remembers the data breach from Capital One last summer. That was a big one. I think about 200, 300 million records were lost of user password hashes and stuff like that. And the woman who did it, pretty much, she worked for Capital One, still had access after she was fired, if I'm correct, and then proceeded to access a database server, export it, and then brag about it on her GitHub. And post them there on a public repository. And she got caught very quickly. But she also did post millions and millions of data records there. So that's good and bad, but just a little reminder, don't post public stuff that shouldn't be public. Especially if you're working for a company, you will get sued. All right, does anybody have any other questions? In regards to anything, I guess, security-wise, I'm happy to answer stuff. To the best of my knowledge.
How have you got like I've heard about you guys going to competitions and then like what are the ways that kind of like during competitions or outside that you've been compromised as kind of like a network security professional?
That's a good one. So for us and for my club, one of the biggest things we do is live hacking competitions. The most recent one is MACCDC. What they do is they give us a big network of computers to secure, usually around, let's say, like 9 to 10. And we have to go in on the command line for Linux, and I think GUI for Windows sometimes. And pretty much just check out the services that are running there, check for backdoors, check for exploits. A lot of the times hackers won't use something too crazy to get you. They'll run some kind of like Python script that'll open up a port in your machine and give them a shell. Another thing but we have seen some really funny things in the competition. If you're a Linux user, one thing they'll do is they'll change your bin files. So they'll change your ls file to print out a picture of a, I don't know, like was an ASCII cat or something like that. They've also changed done this thing called the 9cat bootloader. They changed your master boot record to a GIF of 9cat, so your entire computer is just bricked, and it's just that. But the main way they get in is by pretty much using services that shouldn't be running on your machine or planting backdoors. If that makes sense, I guess.
I think that might be a bell.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions and stuff?
I'm really, I feel like because of the transition to COVID, like because of COVID, a lot of us are just more reckless in terms of how we handle things online and just want to produce like just more content and just everything transitioning online. I just see a lot of room for slipping up. And that's kind of my biggest concern. I think you kind of addressed it earlier, but that's just, yeah, just getting adjusted to these practices and coming with a more paranoid mindset, I think is very, very important. If you could just give like one final point on that.
Yeah. I think one thing you said there actually really good is to actually have a paranoid mindset when you're using a lot of the internet's resources. I mean, everywhere you go, a lot of this stuff is newer out there. Not many people really know what's happening and what's going on with it. Um, please change your passwords. Use a password manager. Careful of software you download. Really the biggest thing I can say. Don't really trust much. Have a paranoid mindset and try to keep security in the back of your head when coding or developing or really anything you do on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out and talking.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You want me to take you through these last few slides here?
No, that's for the past.
If you had to guess, real quick, if you had to guess, like the next kind of big company get hacked, who do you think it would be?
I mean,
Zoom.
I got a random question.
hacked. Big companies are hacked literally every week. Let me see if one actually did that. The last biggest one. Who was it? Let's see. I'm sure there's somebody big here. Privacy snafu. 14 million Telegram. Oh, Marriott. That's a big one. Oh, the hotels.
Yeah.
Hotels are terrible.
I didn't hear about that one.
Yeah, so that actually came out like a day or two ago, but Marriott had a data breach that affected like 5.2 million of their guests. Just another database server pointed somewhere that shouldn't be accessible by the internet, but somebody can see it with a computer. And it turns out that they had company spotted unusual activity occurring on an app that guests used to access services during their stay, which means that one second. I'm gonna see what they actually exposed there. Okay. I mean, it exposed like people's address, phone number, first name, last name, stuff that like if you don't want out there, it's not nice if the company really reveals it. But stuff like this happens, like every single week. Another one. Well, actually, I'm not going to read any article. It's on April 1st. I don't know. But the day before. And hotels are terrible because they just have a ton of computers and they have a large surface area, but I doubt they'll get. I mean, their companies are hit every week.
Wow.
And I think it's also important to like also be wary about like other companies spying in on you. So like Zoom, for example, they claim to have end-to-end encryption, but they really don't. Like it was found out yesterday that they actually have the ability to spy on private video meetings whenever they want. internal company, they can do that. So also important to be aware of that. Like it's hard to when he's trying to hack you, but there's a chance that could happen.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with that. One of the big things, one of the big things that people say is, or VPNs, for example. VPNs pretty much are somebody else taking your traffic and encrypting it and sending it through their server. Now, a lot of it comes with this: how much do you trust the person on the other end that's actually hosting that machine and hosting that server where your data is going? Do you trust that the warehouse it's stored in has a lock on it? Do you trust that they're not reading your data and they're actually keeping up with it? Like TikTok. Well, TikTok's not a VPN or whatever, but TikTok's like owned by the Chinese, I'm pretty sure, and a lot of the data that is on it goes over there. So take that as you will. So on and so forth. Yeah, another thing I'd recommend is general security practices. I mean, that if you're being really paranoid, self-hosting some of your stuff. Man, once I get out of college, I'm going to self-host a lot of my stuff. Like my own password manager will be running on a server in a corner of my room because I know that I can secure everything on it. I control who's going in and out to that server in all parts of it rather than putting it off to the company. But yeah, you're right. People do put a lot of faith in the security of the company you're using.
What's your opinion on cryptocurrencies, Tor, and like things like that that people traditionally kind of hold as secure?
So I don't really have enough knowledge on cryptocurrencies to talk about it. I don't know that much about the back end. However, I don't trust Tor for a second. Again, Tor is yet another way of just moving your data around and sending it out through somebody else's server. And again, it's how much do you trust that Tor end node that you're sending your data out through? Is it really reliable? I don't know. But you never know. I mean, the government could be running Tor end nodes. Who knows, man? That's not public knowledge. And if you don't know for sure, then, I mean, yeah, I'm taking it too well.
Well, I think that concludes our questions. Again, thank you so much for coming out. And we originally planned to do this like in person at GMU, so I'm so glad you're able to do this and people were able to come out. So again, thank you so much for sharing this information.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.